Let's talk with Robin first.
Sure.
All right, Robin in Texas. This is not that Robin, unless they have done something very different.
I'm not that Robin.
Not that Robin. A
No.
nicer and more considerate Robin, hopefully.
Hi, Robin.
Welcome to the show. You want to talk a little bit about how not to straw man people with opposing viewpoints?
Yeah, I'm trying to get into creative writing, and I'm working on a piece about religion. And I'm an atheist, but I don't want to misrepresent. I don't want to paint with too broad of a brush to the point where I misrepresent people who have faith. But I also want to make something that's religious critical. But I also don't want to make atheists look like assholes.
Yeah, that's always very tricky, especially if you've watched things like, Midnight Mass or Raised by Wolves. That is kind of a thing that's happening now where people are actually explicitly getting into that division, which is cool. But yeah, it really does take a nuanced touch in order to keep it from becoming a straw man. Do you have a religious background, Robin?
My grandparents were religious, and my mom claims to believe it, but she doesn't really have a good reason. So whenever I was little, and they told me that God drowned a bunch of kids and killed a bunch of firstborn kids, and I was like, you said your God is good and perfect, right? So either you're lying to me or something just isn't adding up, and I walked away from it at that point.
Okay. Yeah. Well. At this point, what I would probably say is, do you know what the term sensitivity readers are?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of people who will be writing about maybe a group that they want to make sure they're accurately representing and not being insensitive by accident while they're trying to, communicate what their story's about, will hire people called sensitivity readers who are from that demographic and who have specifically offered to do reading of other people's work to make sure that, everything is, okay. So one thing that you might consider doing is, as you're writing this or after you've written it, however long it is, talk to somebody who you think might be willing to read over it and offer a theist perspective. Oh, hey, this might not be 100% accurate. Obviously, don't go to a pastor of your local church who's going to be offended by it. But there are plenty of theists who are open-minded and progressive enough to get what you're trying to do and offer good feedback. So
okay,
that would be my main. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, since it's religious critical, that I want to get the point out of it. I did have 3 simple questions, and I don't really understand if we could get mostly through one of them.
Sure.
But I had 3 simple questions that I wanted to ask each of you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of to mine it for content. What at minimum would it take to convince you that a God exists? What at minimum would it take for a God to convince you to worship it? And what would you say to a God in our world if it appeared to you?
Ooh.
I like those.
Do you want to go first?
You can go first.
Okay. So let's go through them one by one really quick. So the first was, what would it take to convince me that a God exists?
Yes, at minimum.
Sure. So a definition that I can accept. If you define God as something benign, I'll probably be just fine agreeing with it. If you have a fantastical definition for your God, it's going to be more difficult. But what
I've written down a definition that maybe we can start with.
Do you want to go there, or do you want the other 2 answers? It's up to you. How do you want the conversation to go?
Hopefully we could just, if you disagree with this, then we can move past it. If you disagree with it, we can move past it. Or if you agree with it, then we can, I guess, also move past it. But a disembodied consciousness with reality-shaping capabilities that is fundamental to the nature of our universe.
Oh, well, that's an interesting definition.
That's a really nice one.
Yeah.
So I think that you will get pushback from believers because it's a little too impersonal, because it doesn't include a lot of the caveats that they would want to put into it.
Although it does sufficiently move you from kalam into sentient God territory if you accept that definition.
Fair. I would not necessarily pop the disembodied part.
I think that's key, though.
But I mean, in the Old Testament, you have people seeing parts of God's body. Like, God existed bodily.
You projected that to them. I know. They don't know that that's real.
Yeah.
Maybe.
So
I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that for me, a minimal, the first thing that would need to happen for that minimal acceptance of a God, based on the one you've described, is proof that there can be such a thing as a disembodied mind. And then also proof that minds can influence the physical world external from the physical world. So, our minds do not create physical things. Our minds influence our bodies, which then create physical things. So those two elements would have to be proven to my satisfaction to then allow me to think about maybe there is a larger or more comprehensive version of that outside of my understanding of the world.
Yeah.
Beyond proving that it's possible, what if a God was in front of you? Like, what would it take for you to be convinced that you're not just hallucinating?
A lot.
Yeah, I mean, getting other people to see that God as well, getting kind of, second, third, fourth parties who can, test and check that, you're not completely
right. There would also
yourself.
have to be some form of residue, for lack of a better term. Like, we would have to be able to scan for something that was different in the space where God showed up, right? Like, oh, look, I don't know, neutrons are spinning the opposite direction in this God-shaped piece of space.
Well, and this assumes that it's that assumes that it's disembodied. If you had, a physical body in front of you and you could,
poke it.
yeah. Then that's a way to test that part. But
what about the second one? What would a God have to do minimally
for us to worship it?
To convince you to worship it?
Threaten me with a lot of pain. So there's a difference between get me to worship or whether or not it is worthy of worship. Mm-hmm. You could get me to worship if under threat of pain, for sure. That does not mean that it is worthy of worship. So
what would it take for it to be worthy of your worship?
I don't know. Because the thing is, the more I've learned and grown as an adult, the more I've realized that the kind of people who require that kind of affection and adulation from the people around them are generally really toxic. If you need people who are going to praise you with every breath, and like it's a very, very uncomfortable dynamic that I don't see a lot of benefit to. So I don't know what.
So the need of it to want you to worship it is enough to disqualify you from worshiping it on its own terms?
Well, I mean, I would be consistent in the way that I deal with people, right? So if I do that with people, then I would need to create a special section for God to get away from that, me being internally consistent.
Well, also, if a God requires, in order to sustain itself, your worship, then you are by definition more powerful than that God and can have it cease to exist by not worshiping it. Therefore, it doesn't deserve worship in the first place. If what you're trying to worship is some form of like omnipotence. So yeah, I think
and then
the
it
worship
vanishes in a puff of logic. Okay.
Exactly. It's like, clap if you believe. It's Tinkerbell.
Yeah. Anyway.
I think for me, worship is a loaded word, and it depends on what kind of worshiping you're talking about as well. Because there are, other religions where worship is not what, modern Christianity has made it into, right? I don't think anything could convince me, even threat of pain or death, to worship anything in the way that I used to as a Christian. But if we're talking from a more like pantheistic standpoint of like revering the universe for being life-giving, or, our ancestors for being the connection to a past we will never know, and like getting all esoteric, that's cool. I could see that being a thing at some point. But then that God would have to convince me that it held the same awe or wonder that the universe itself does.
Yeah, and it also depends. I mean, if there's a cost benefit analysis there, like I like your pantheistic spin on it, because I think that if there was a pantheon of gods and there was a god of the harvest, and by worshiping it, it favored me and I got a better harvest, I could see myself being like,
yeah, maybe if there was a better cost benefit analysis thing happening. That's funny. Yeah. And then okay, Robin, what was the third one?
What would you say to a god in our world if it appeared to you? And you can use the Abrahamic god, or you can use whichever idea you want.
The Abrahamic god I'd have some words for. But in general, if someone showed up to me or something and was like, I am a god, I would say, cool, prove it. And if they did, minimally to my satisfaction, I'd be like, that's cool. Thanks for communicating with me, I guess. And if they couldn't, then I'd probably just ignore them.
Okay,
yeah,
that's reasonable.
I feel like if there were a god that met the kind of the definition of the god that I understood, the god that knew your every thought, then I'd have nothing to say, because there's nothing.
Because you're just going to think it.
Yeah, and if you have an omniscient God, then there's nothing that I'm going to do that, do or say that God hasn't already had to deal with.
You can't be surprised.
Yeah, so honestly,
what if he gives you one chance to protest and listens to you?
I've been when I believed in a God, I was protesting, eventually, because I thought, there's way too much awfulness in the world. How could a loving God accept this? But if a God, I don't know, like if a God wanted to talk to me and they waited, then what would have stopped them from talking to me before? There's just,
I don't know. They were busy, or they were sleeping.
They're like, I was talking to everyone else on the planet. Wait your goddamn turn.
I would say I forfeit my turn in line. Go and heal a kid with cancer, you asshole. Like,
or hey,
spend this time doing something useful.
Or we could just invite them on the show.
Yeah.
Like, all right, we've been looking for you in public. Come on the show.
Skeptic Generation presents the Roast of God.
I mean, I would give anything for that. That would be amazing. All right, Robin, I hope that these questions were helpful for you.
Yeah, I'm sure they were. So I'm going to have to listen to them again and again. So I did watch Midnight Mass based on your review of it. I had tried to get through the first 2 episodes and I couldn't because of all the religious stuff. And then you recommended it, and I went back and I watched it again with my girlfriend. So yeah, no, you've already been incredibly helpful. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, and good luck writing.
Take care.
Bye.
That was nice. An interesting call.
Yeah.
I love those kinds of questions.
Definitely. What I was a little worried about at the beginning was this kind of steelman push, because that's what I get a lot from atheists who write or call in. They'll be like, oh, well, every God has to be a young earth creationist, and every believer, needs to believe in literal interpretations of everything, and it's like, that's not useful. But no, this was not that. It was a lot better than I thought it would be.
Cool.
Yeah.